On today's Story Beat.
Make your connections.
Connections.
Connections. I mean, this is a business of who you know and making good relationships and keeping good relationships and meet people. And if you're just starting out, interning for somebody or, getting in that, or even like getting your foot in the door of somewhere, place where you want to work, because then you can work your way up. Take, for instance, Adam Vallon was an intern. He started off as our intern, and now he's got he does a lot for the company right now. So it worked out good.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Brian Drusky, has been a concert and events promoter for more than 2 decades here in his native Pittsburgh. Brian founded Drusky Entertainment more than 10 years ago after many years working with the well-known concert promoter DiCesare-Engler Productions, which was one of the region's top-grossing concert producers, a successful position Brian now occupies. Drusky Entertainment currently presents hundreds of live concerts and events every year throughout the Western Pennsylvania region. One of Brian's greatest achievements is in helping to bring a wide variety of events and acts to the revered music hall in the Carnegie Library of Homestead, ranging from Patti Smith to Frank Caliendo to Cary Elwes and even William Shatner, the latter two of which I know a little since I was privileged to moderate the question and answer sessions for both events. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm truly honored to welcome the Pittsburgh powerhouse, better known as Brian Drusky, to StoryBeat today. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, my privilege, really. All right, so let's go back in time a little bit. Where in your lifetime did you develop this passion for live events and acts and that kind of thing? When did that start? As a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I was always into music. I mean, I would always, when I was a little kid, I would listen to like the, Casey Kasem's American Top 40 and write down all the singles and all that stuff. So I always loved music. And then, I got a taste of, going to concerts as I got older and then it kind of worked into where it is today.
So in other words, it's been in your blood for quite some time, but were you inspired or influenced by any one particular thing as a kid, or was it just in general?
In general, yeah, nothing really inspired me, yeah.
So what then drew you to becoming a producer and promoter of music and acts and events?
Well, I mean, I kind of fell into it. I mean, because I was trying to, I graduated college and was looking for work. I never knew I wanted to do this. I was always just a big music person, and just so happened that at one point, a friend of mine was starting a local band. So I said, well, yeah, let me try to, book your band, manage your band, do stuff like that, kind of getting into that. And as I did that, I went into starting to meet people. And at that point, I met Rich Engler from DiCesare-Engler Productions, and I met other people, and then he offered me a job. He offered me a job like booking like local bands. At the first thing, it was working because they were starting at DiCesare-Engler Management, and he offered me a job doing that. And then that kind of went by the wayside pretty quickly. But then I kind of stayed on because I was learning other things, producing events, and I knew how to book. I knew how to book shows. I'd done that for a while then. At that point, so
but they had you focused at first on local acts, not national acts.
Yeah, for like the first couple months, and then when that kind of went by the wayside, I started booking national talent after that. But I had booked national talent before that. Anyhow, as I worked for a company, but kind of part-time, booking colleges and stuff like that.
Is there a major difference other than the fame or notoriety of an act between booking a local act and a national act? I assume it's pretty much the same thing.
Yes and no. I mean, when you're booking a national act, you're dealing with a lot of different aspects. I mean, when you're booking a national act, you're dealing with agents, you're dealing with managers, you're dealing with a whole bunch of people. and you're, I mean, and you figure out dates and tours. I mean, where when you're booking a local act, I mean, they're local, and if they can't play Friday, maybe they can play Saturday. You know what I mean? But
Right.
if you're booking a national act, there might already be, they might have, May 1st available, but they're in Cincinnati on May 2nd.
So it's a little tighter. It's a little more rigorous than with a national act than a local act. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, because they're routing tours, they're doing everything around that
And
to
and
make
back
an
and,
actual 40-day tour or 30-day or 40-day tour work.
and back then, how active was it? Was it as active as it is today? Well, we'll talk about. We're recording this sort of as we're coming out of COVID. And we'll talk about COVID in a little bit. But during your normal course of booking acts, when it's very active, was it that active back then too, or has it become more so?
It's probably a little more active now. I mean, there's always been a lot of competition in this city. For some reason, I don't understand why. Because you go to a place like Columbus, and there's like no one who wants to book shows. It's really weird. But in Pittsburgh, there's a lot of people who want to book events all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was always competitive. I mean, it's got a lot more competitive in the last 20 years. If you're into it, your phone is attached to your hip, and you're working you're working nonstop.
24/7, 365, I imagine.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so what was it about Pittsburgh as you grew up here? You're a native Pittsburgher, as am I. What was it about Pittsburgh, do you think, that helped to shape your outlook on business, your outlook on the entertainment industry? Was there something about Pittsburgh that helped to form you?
It's not a town I'm going to leave. I mean, I've had the chance to leave a few times, and I just like my city.
What makes Pittsburgh great in your opinion?
It's a small, big city. So
I agree with that. You can get around anywhere quickly. It's rarely a traffic problem, occasionally a little bit.
Yeah.
Rarely is there a traffic problem. And you can sort of see so many different cultural things. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, but as I said, I mean, it's a big city. I mean, we get a lot of stuff that come here. There's a lot of people that live here, but it's not as big as Chicago or Los Angeles.
Oh no,
Houston. You know what I mean? So I mean, but
I spent 35 years in LA. It's definitely not LA.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right. So I want to talk about producing as a skill set. This is something that you're obviously very good at. Some people, I think, don't think of producers or promoters or people that put stuff together like you do as being creative types. And when I say creative, I don't mean necessarily you're creating material, but you still have to be pretty creative about what you do, I assume. And so how much creative thinking do you think goes into your work?
I mean, we have to be creative. I mean, you have to come up with new ways creatively, you have to come up with new ways for people on how to reach them. I mean, because we were promoting shows, I mean, really before the internet. So, I mean, now everything's internet, but you were doing, your newspaper ads and getting things out, trying to get people to see that, to know where their concerts are. It's a lot easier for people to see where the concerts, where to advertise to them now, because everyone has their phone in their hand. You get a lot of that on your phone. We do some marketing that way. I mean, obviously you still do some of the same stuff with radio, because people still listen to the radio, whether it's on the internet or whether it's in their cars or whatever. I mean, but then you also have Sirius radio, which people listen to and don't hear you. So the creativity with how I come up with it, just kind of getting to people.
It's the marketing part of it that you have to be creative about, I assume.
Correct. Yes.
And I assume you also have to be a little creative in how you get certain acts into town.
Yeah. Like I said, Pittsburgh's a small, big city, and full circle. I mean, sometimes acts skip Pittsburgh because they want to do the larger cities.
Sure. That makes sense.
So, I mean, just trying to give them the idea of why they want to come to Pittsburgh, and you're always selling your city on it. But
we do bring in the biggest of the big acts too. I mean, they come in correct. For sure. Paul McCartney, Elton John, all those big acts come in as well. Do you think that the way that you market is what makes you successful?
Yeah, I mean, I always like to think I've been ahead of the game. I mean, we're the first company to use Twitter as a marketing idea. Mm-hmm. I mean, one knew what Twitter was, and we were using Twitter to market to people. I mean, I noticed that way from the beginning. Facebook, I'm not sure if we were the first ones in this city. I'm not saying in the world, but I'm saying in this city, we were
Sure.
the first ones to market that way. And just doing other things that, staying ahead of the game. And I always said, watching people do what I've done marketing wise has been, imitation is the
Sincerest form of
flattery. Yeah.
So you, at one time, there, as you say, there was no internet. You would advertise and market mainly through what? Local radio, perhaps a little TV, and mostly newspapers of some sort or another.
Yeah, newspapers, and you're making sure you had flyers at the shows and stuff like that. But so it's definitely come a long way.
Less paper intensive today.
Yeah, exactly. And in 20 years, it'll probably be totally different again.
Probably right. I mean, we don't know where the technology is going. It'll probably be in your brain. There'll probably be a chip in your head, and it'll beep it out to people, and they'll just know that there's going to be a concert. What is it that when you deal with these huge number of musical acts? Because when I see your site, your website, and I see various other advertising of yours, marketing of yours, you bring in a huge number of acts. How many acts do you think a year you bring into town?
Anywhere from, and not just in Pittsburgh, but the companies, anywhere from 500 to 600 a year.
Well, that's a huge number.
Yeah, I mean, pre-COVID, our biggest year, which was right before COVID, 2019, we did 640 shows, I think, in one year.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're going to talk about those large numbers as well. What do you think is the main thing that has changed over the years in dealing with that many acts? Is it the fact that you have a computer and that changes the way that you manage everything?
What do you mean?
Well, so for instance, before there were computers, I guess you would have figured out all of the production venues and capabilities on paper. Now you do it through scheduling on a computer of some kind.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, everything's, there's Google Calendars. I did this before email even. So, I mean, it was you were faxing offers to acts. It was kind of funny.
And prior to faxes, you would have had to have done it either through a telephone or through the mail.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny. But yeah, I mean, you over everything piece by piece on the phone. I was in the business that long, but like someone like Rich Engler was, what I mean?
So over your time in the business, you've seen the competition not only among people that do what you do, but you've seen competition increase in other ways as well. So for instance, there's cable and streaming and video games, and there's other forms of entertainment, sports and so on. There's other forms of entertainment that are taking eyeballs away from what you want them to come to. Do you have a methodology of really breaking through that to influence people to come?
No, I mean, yes and no. I mean, it's just, you just got to get to what people are doing, because you spent like $5,000 marketing a show and they're like, well, I didn't even know that show was coming. And that's like so frustrating because you're like, we spent all this money and you're like going in every avenue where you think people are watching it and they're like, oh, I didn't even hear about that. So it's definitely, you have to stay up on everything to make sure you're spending your money wisely and it's not being wasted on areas where people aren't looking.
What do you do to know your market? How do you determine, hey, we know we want this band and this band and this band to come in, or we want to book William Shatner now, or whatever it would be? How do you know your market? What do you do to learn your market to know, yes, that's probably going to succeed here? Obviously, you're going to have bigger successes and lesser successes, but what is it you do to tap into the knowledge of the market?
You kind of research other markets. We have ability to see how shows have done in other like markets. Like I always look at cities like similar to ours, like Cleveland, Cincinnati, Buffalo, St. Louis, kind of smaller, big cities, like I said, and see how shows are doing there and see how the shows have done in those places. I mean, because it's really hard to compare yourself to a Philly or a Chicago or a New York City because there's just so many more people.
Sure.
Yeah. So if they're doing, say an act is doing 5,000 people in New York City, you're probably you're going to do maybe half that in Pittsburgh. unless it's really hot and everyone wants to see them. What it is, I mean, you have your really hot acts that everyone wants to see, and then you have very popular acts, and then you have, your legendary acts that, some people want to see, some people don't want to see. Some people are on the fence. So, I mean, when you're putting the deal together, you have to figure out if the ticket price, there's a lot of things that go in there because there's expenses on the show. And, the band wants a guarantee, you negotiate back and forth on that, on the guarantee, and you figure out, with all that being put together, you put together the ticket prices. Sometimes they tell you the ticket price they want. Sometimes you decide the ticket prices, and you figure out, okay, if 500 people or 800 people are going to pay $50 or $80 or $200 to see this act and make it worthwhile. And then sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong.
Is there a kind of act that you prefer to book? Is it rock and roll? Is it folk? Is it, you know what I'm saying? Are there genres that you prefer to book that are going to be more attractive here in Pittsburgh? Or are you open to a very wide range of things?
I'm kind of open to everything. I mean, I do a lot of comedy. I do a lot of, I do a lot of rock. I do every genre. And, that's kind of the way you have to be. You got to be well-rounded and book everybody. There was somebody I'd heard one time, there's no bad bands, just bad deals. I mean, they're all, if they're famous enough to tour nationally, there's somebody out there who wants to see them, whether that's 50 people or whether that's 5,000 people.
Well, you also book bands that are, I would not call nationally famous. They're more locally famous, or they're regionally famous, or people want to see them because they're in a region of a certain kind. You don't have any problem booking those kinds of acts either?
No, not at all.
Not at all. And what determines for you? Is it this research of other markets that determines for you that a band is viable to come in or an act is viable to come in? Or are there acts that you have your eye on for a long time that maybe were a little less viable for a while and then they finally became so? Does that work that way too?
Yeah, probably a little bit of both. Like I've been, there's acts that I've been trying for 15, 20 years to get to Pittsburgh, and they've never played here.
Do you want to say who? You don't have to. Is there anybody that you'd really love to get into town?
Like I've been, an act that's never headlined here is Jack Johnson. I've been trying to get him here for years. He's played Cleveland probably 7 times. He's just never played Pittsburgh.
Interesting.
Funny.
Does he just dislike Pittsburgh, do you think?
No, I just don't know. I have no idea. It just has never worked out where he made it to town. It's funny. He's never headlined here.
Is there something for you that makes an act, a good act, good? Is there something that sets them apart? Is there something about something you can look at a group, an act, whatever it is, and say to yourself, that's a successful act, and this is going to be less successful over time? Can you determine that?
Yes and no. I mean, a band is good when you listen to them. You know what I mean? And you can tell that there's some talent there, but it's hard to know the trends. I mean, because you're living in the times, you know what I mean? So, I mean, you can easily go back to the 70s and be like, okay, well, disco, when disco was on, you thought disco was going to be there forever. Or, you can go back to the 80s and think like, well, you're the 80s, like new wave acts. I mean, they're still they're still kind of popular, and your hair metal bands and things like that. Where at the time they were huge. I mean, and there's still a market for that.
Sure.
I mean, I book frequently with my company as well, but I'm saying when you're in the times, it's hard to tell where something's going to drop off. I mean, because every 10 years or 15 years, there's a new boy band that comes back around.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So that's cyclical. I mean, there was New Kids on the Block. And then 10, 15 years later, it was Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and 98 Degrees. And then
now it's BTS.
Yeah, exactly. One Direction. So there's always
One Direction.
It was One Direction. Now it's BTS. So it's always moving, and
it's shifting. It's constantly shifting.
Yeah, constantly shifting. So I mean, but there's things that still stay popular. I mean, is one thing that we've always talked about in this business is your heritage acts. Like you got 70s and 80s like when they retire and not tour, and unfortunately, when they stop touring because of deaths in the bands and stuff, it's a lot of the headliners. If you look at like these amphitheaters and stuff, you see Kiss, and you see the Eagles, and you see Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen. You see a lot of these heritage acts that once they go away, it's going to be a little different. But you have the live experience with, there are always going to be newer bands that everyone wants to see. But right now, there's a big stable of, as you want to call it, classic rock bands that do a big business, and eventually that's going to go away.
Well, a lot of this has changed because the music industry itself has changed, where it's very challenging to sell records. And when you started out, people were still selling records and CDs.
Mhm.
That's very much been diminished. And the place where they make their money is on the road most of the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's why, that's one of the things you used to look at when you were talking about researching. Back in the day, you would see how many records were sold in this market. We used to have research to say there was 10,000 records of this band sold in Pittsburgh. You know what I mean? We had charts to look at that stuff, but you can't do that anymore. You look at streams. I mean, you can look at how many bands they're liked in Pittsburgh. You can kind of look at that. There's ways to look at that there's research on that, but it's totally different. Figuring out what people like and what they don't like in the general area.
Well, has it made it tough for you to figure that stuff out, or has it made it easier for you to figure it out?
A little bit of both. A little bit, because it's funny, because as we were just talking about looking at CD sales, you had to learn that depending on what act it was, if they were an active audience, if they were going to actually go to the concerts, and if they sold, say someone sold 100,000 records in here, but then you brought them in, and you're thinking 3,000 people were going to show up and only 1,000 people showed up. You got to go back and be like, well, why did that happen? And you see if they were active enough, or back in the day, was kids buying the records, and the parents just didn't want them to go to concerts. And so it was very difficult. It's very difficult, and that's why you look at how they're doing in other markets and how excited they are. You can see.
How actively do you do postmortems where you actually discuss with your group, well, this didn't work, or this worked great, and we want to repeat that sort of thing? How frequently do you have those kinds of conversations?
All the time. We wonder why an act, and we talk about it like, this act sold out in Cleveland and we only did 600 people. You figure out why. You know what I mean? Say we were looking for 1,000 people, and then we did 600. So you're like, well, why? It's similar markets. Ticket price was around the same. Like, why did they do better in that market than they did here? And you study that. You got to figure out why.
And how frequently are you able to make those determinations? Are you able to pretty much figure it out regularly?
No, yes and no. Sometimes you just never know why. You're just like, just a head scratcher.
Is that then an act that you will not bring back in?
No, you could bring. Like I said before, there's no bad acts, just bad deals. So maybe the deal is different the next time. If they wanted a certain amount of money this time and they didn't do that well, then you offer them a little less money.
And it could be bad promotion. It could be the weather. It could be all kinds of different things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what would you say is the most valuable lesson you learned early on, perhaps from DiCesare-Engler or somewhere else, that you learned early on in your career that has influenced you through to today in the way that you conduct business?
You got to be honest. In this business, there's the idea of the slimy promoter, you know what I mean? Or the producer, that quote unquote, they're going to somehow try to cheat you. And that's nothing I've ever been. I've always been honest. And if you can't be the person you wake up in the morning looking in the mirror at, and you're not cheating anybody, you're doing the right thing all the time, then why are you doing this?
Well, you're saying you have to live with yourself.
Correct. Yes.
I think a truly honest person would feel horrible about being some kind of a cheat. And yet we know that the world, not just in the entertainment industry at large, the world at large is filled with people who shade the truth or cheat a little bit.
Of course.
And so my assumption is that over time, you've actually dealt with a few of those characters.
Oh yeah. There's plenty. I've dealt with plenty of people that
In the
way.
entertainment industry? Come on, Brian. Nobody's dishonest in the entertainment industry.
Oh yeah, I mean, and I've been doing this now for almost 30 years now, and I've
Mm.
seen plenty of shysters, you know,
And
fortunate, but
you're saying the right thing by focusing on doing the right things.
always got to do the right thing. You
That-
always got to be kind, and you always got to be, just a upstanding person. That's what I've always believed in.
I've long lived by the philosophy of when in doubt, do the right thing.
Correct.
And you can never go wrong that way.
Exactly. Because
Never.
as we said, if you're telling too many lies, you got to remember the lies you told.
Oh,
You know
no,
what I mean?
no kidding. And
The truth comes right to you.
exactly. You don't have to fake your way through it. This is the way it is. And sometimes that can be painful.
Yeah.
That you're telling the absolute truth. Sometimes that can be difficult. And sometimes that can be harsh on business, I assume. But
Yeah.
you're still doing the right thing. You still have to, like you say, wake up with yourself in the morning.
Yeah, and then if you make a mistake, you got to own up to it. There's so many people that make mistakes, and they don't own up to them. It's like, hey, that you learn from your mistakes. If you don't learn from the mistakes you make, then But if you hide from your mistakes, then you didn't learn anything.
I think
Everyone's
that-
going to make mistakes. It's how big the mistake is, and is it going to cost you too much or whatever. I mean, like I said, sometimes you make money on shows, and sometimes you're losing money on shows. There's days where, one day you can make $10,000, the next day you can lose $30,000. I mean, you just got to make sure you make the right decisions. And
I've never thought of it this way, but I'll ask the question because it just dawns on me. Is it a little bit of having a gambler's mentality in the business?
Yes, it's exactly what it is.
You're playing poker, aren't you?
Yeah, pretty much. It's legalized gambling, really. If you think about it, I mean, you're putting money on the line to see if the act is going to sell enough tickets to make money.
It's risk assessment, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. It's exactly what it is. And that's why you're deciding if it makes sense. And I've been doing this now on my own. It's my 16th year, so I hope, knock on wood, I made all the right decisions, and I continue to make right decisions.
All right, so let's talk about how did you manage to survive through COVID, which we're now a couple of years into that game where COVID has hit. We're in 2022. How did you manage to survive where you didn't have any acts to promote?
That was very interesting because we said everyone's going 100 miles an hour. There's always shows and there's always something going on. And it was really weird to go from 100 miles an hour to zero practically overnight. I mean, you're
slam on the brakes.
Yeah, I mean, it started, okay, this one act canceled, then this one act canceled, then this one canceled, and this one canceled, and this one. It was just like onslaught of things, and it was just, you're looking at that and you're like, what is going on here? And then you're thinking, okay, this is only going to last. I mean, I did an interview where, okay, some of these shows are postponing and canceling, and I said, we're hoping everything gets back to normal in June. I did that interview with Scott Mervis from the Post-Gazette. We're like, okay, the way they were talking about it, that's what it looked like. It's like, okay, this is going to go up and go down. We're going to, flatten the curve.
In 2020, when it first hit.
Yes, we're flattening the curve, and okay, everything's going to kind of get back. Because I mean, that's what things were postponing to. Okay, let's postpone this until July. And then, okay, July comes in. Okay, let's postpone this until September. And then you're like thinking everything's going to be back to normal in the fall. And then that didn't happen. And then getting to 2021, things were still, the winter of 2021 to 22 was terrible for COVID. I mean, that was probably the worst it ever was. And then it started to get better right after that. And then things started to get better in 2020. Right in the mid May, June, things started to get back to normal. Ish, not 100% normal, because still not 100% normal. It's very close, but it's not back to the way it was yet.
Mm-hmm.
Almost at this point, but not quite yet. But like I said, it was very different. I mean, and we learning how to survive through that. There's a few things. I mean, we all, as competitors in Pittsburgh, most of us, I wouldn't say everybody, but most of us kind of got together and we're talking about how to figure this out and survive. And that all came together through a national conglomerate of independent venues and promoters called NEVA.
Mm-hmm.
So we had all these people from all over the country independently, kind of talking about things and how we're going to work through this and what we can do, and figuring out how to survive in this business. And finally, after figuring out with different things, I mean, the government did the shuttered venue grant, which helped a lot of independent venues and promoters. There was, I mean, it's a grant. I mean, there were loans obviously to begin with, but and there was so many different projects for different industries, and that one was the first of its kind because no one ever thinks of the independent promoter. I mean, when you have like the large companies, there's people that work there, they're not putting their livelihood on the line.
Right.
But you're, as a independent promoter, every day you live and die by the decisions you make.
Sure you do.
You know what I mean? Whether you're not, if you make bad decisions when you work for a larger company, the larger company takes a hit. You're still getting your paycheck.
Sure.
If you make too many bad decisions, you may lose your house. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So,
well, I know that I was contacted in 2019 by Adam Valen, who's on your staff, who's a terrific guy to deal with. And he contacted me because you guys were looking for someone to moderate the Cary Elwes event at the music hall at Carnegie Library in Homestead. And that was supposed to happen in May of 2020. Well, it got canceled, and then it got canceled, and then it got canceled, and it got canceled. And it was the fourth go all the way into October of 2021 before the event actually happened. So that's, that had to have been both heartbreaking and really kind of nerve-wracking to go through for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's very difficult. Like I said, man, we just had for instance, I had a couple shows that were 2 years in the making. We Letterkenny from the TV show,
right?
The comedy thing that actually was going to be March 25th of 2020, just April 25th of 2022. That's how long it got postponed.
Wow.
Because you were dealing with them taping the TV show as well. So you had that to deal with, as well as COVID and making sure it happened. But there's a couple of those like that. Same thing. I had a Trace Adkins show in Youngstown that was supposed to be right at, like, it was supposed to be April of 2020, and that got postponed until just this past Monday. So that's how long it took for that to happen. I'm saying it's very different. It's something we've never seen in this business, that it took 2 years for a show to happen. And that's people keeping their tickets and making sure that they and then some shows were canceled and some were postponed, and it just all depends on how people wanted to do it.
And I assume you had to give the money back. Yeah.
Well, if the show is canceled, you're refunding people's tickets, obviously, yes. And then sometimes when they were postponed, like take the Tracy Adkins idea, that money's still in the kind of the quote unquote bank, that those tickets were still good after 2 years. I mean, it's constant communication with the fans, and if they decided they didn't want to wait until they played, you refunded their tickets. But most people were, not all of them, because you have people who are like, oh, you should just refund everything. It's like, well, you're not in the business either. You don't understand how it works. But most people wanted to keep. We already spent the money. I really want to see this act. If you're just coming back, I'm going to hold on my tickets because maybe I got front row tickets.
Sure.
Or I had really good seats.
Of course. I hung on to tickets to certain events, and eventually they panned out. How do you determine where an act should play? There are various sized venues. There are venues that have seats. There are venues that have limited seats or no seats at all. People stand. How do you determine this act belongs in this venue and that act belongs in the other venue? How do you make that determination?
It's difficult. I mean, if it's a younger crowd, you're going to go all total GA. You know what I mean? They don't want to sit. If you have somewhat of a slightly older crowd, you can get away with half seats and half. Maybe it's like no seats like on right in front of the stage, and then there's seats like up in a balcony or seats somewhere else. Seats in the sides or whatever. But it's depending on the demographic of the fan is
so you're basing it largely on whether it's a younger skewed audience or an older skewed audience.
Correct. But sometimes yeah, and I've seen acts play in GA rooms where I'm like, wow. And I'll be like, that seems so crazy that this band with their demographic is probably 50s, and I'm 50 years old. I don't want to stand the whole time. You know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like I'm surprised that that act wants to play in a total general admission room.
I was going to say GA means general admission for the listener that doesn't know.
Yeah, yeah. But it's saying like, well, I'm like, I will if I have to, but I don't want to stand. I don't want to stand for a show the whole time anymore. When I was in my 20s, I didn't care. When I was 20s, 30s, yeah, it was kind of fun. But still, you got to know what your audience is, and like in some of these acts, maybe some of these acts, they're so, oh, we want to play in the, where there's no seats, and I'm like, well, maybe your fans don't want you to play there. You know what I mean? Maybe they want to have a chair. They want, and they think that if it's in a theater, it's there's that whole, it's a whole big interesting thing. Like if they're in a theater, then people just sit the whole time. Like just because there's a seat doesn't mean they're going to sit. I mean, there's acts that play a theater and people are standing the whole time. You know what I mean? Looks like if you go to, the amphitheater, there's mostly seats. So, and now people don't sit there the whole time.
No,
Most
they
of the time
stand. No, they stand up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like at sporting events, they'll stand up for a whole game.
Yeah, exactly. So it just depends on what it is.
All right. So you've booked an act. You've determined which comes first, the booking of the act or the booking of the venue. Do you fill a slot in a venue, or do you book an act and then get the venue?
Sometimes it's back and forth. I mean, sometimes it's because you don't book the act until you have the venue. You know what I mean? So you can't just say, okay, I'm booking a certain, you're not booking Michael Jackson or whatever. I'm just throwing somebody out there.
Yeah.
Or you're not booking somebody before you have the venue's available on a certain date he wants to come in.
So what happens if they decide they don't want to, do you go book somebody else? Is that how that works? If you have a venue locked, or are you able to release the venue?
Yeah. You put holds on dates. And like there's times you put holds on dates for shows. 6 a.m. booking a show. I have a hold on the calendar at Carnegie Music Hall of Homestead, and then they decide they want to play somewhere else. So it just doesn't happen. You know what I mean?
How typically far in advance do you book these things?
Usually the best amount of time is 2 months. If you get a little bit,
that's all. Just 2 months. You're not a year out. You're not 6 months out. It's just 2 months.
There's sometimes you are, but I mean, you don't want to go any less than 2 months. It's anywhere from two. I mean, sometimes you book a show that's a month in advance if it's hot enough. I mean, there was a show I did with Dave Chappelle, and we announced it on. I took the phone. How to say? Let me try to remember. This was about 7 years ago. Took a phone call on a Wednesday, got everything together, announced it on Monday, and the show was the next Wednesday or Thursday. And I might have the days wrong, but within a week the shows happened.
So that's about as fast as it can get, isn't it?
Oh yeah, but I mean, you knew Dave Chappelle was, he's
gonna sell out.
Yeah.
People were waiting for that.
Yeah, so I mean, but you can't do that with everybody. You know what I mean? I remember Prince did that in the arena one time. It wasn't my show or anything, but I remember Prince booked a show a week out at the Mellon Arena, and it was like, wow, and everyone went. But if you think about it, people react quickly because, I mean, like take for instance the as we said, sporting events, which is entertainment as well. You don't know when the playoff games are going to be. Like next week, the Penguins are in the playoffs.
Right.
You don't know what day those are going to be, but they're going to be. If it happens to be on Tuesday, it's not like people aren't going to go to it.
Well, we also know if an act is big enough or an attraction is big enough, just like a sporting event, when they say, hey, tickets are going on sale next Tuesday at 10 in the morning, they might sell out in a few minutes.
Correct.
So people are geared up and ready, and all you got to do is pull that trigger, but the act has to be big enough. Yes.
Correct. Yeah. And big enough is relative in relatively speaking.
Sure, because if you're going into an arena, it has to be really big. If you're going into a little venue, it doesn't have to be anywhere near as big.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all relative.
and do you book acts into the arenas as well?
I don't do the arena as much. I mean, I've done a couple things in there. Like I'll do some bigger things outdoors. I mean, it's it's pricey to go into the arenas unless you could go in somewhere and know you might lose $100,000 if you didn't make the right decision, or more. I mean, you could lose more than that depending on how expensive the act is. So it's got to be a well calculated risk before
Right.
you go.
So we talked about that you basically promote 450 to 500 to 600 events a year. How many do you think you're handling at any one given time? What are the most you're handling at one time?
Oh, that's a interesting question. I mean, it's usually anywhere from 50 to 70 at a time.
Wow, really? That many?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Ask,
and
ask
what do
Adam
you
how.
what do you do to keep track of it all? I know you've got, again, we're talking again about the technology and you have computers, but there's got to be more to it than just having computers. How do you keep track of it all? How do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, it's just what I do. I mean, I have a good team. You have a good team. Like you said, Adam, and and we have good people on our team. Like there's James and Randy and Kara and Mark and Hope and all these people that kind of work together to kind of make it work. So I mean,
and not to bag on anybody, because I'm not trying to, but does anybody ever screw up and make a mistake and you miss something totally?
I mean, we don't miss shows, but sometimes you miss something. I mean, and it's like I said, you're human. It's human error, and then sometimes somebody made a mistake, and it happens. But you got to make sure. But that's why you have checks and balances. Sometimes I miss things, and Adam catches them.
Sure.
He's like, you forgot to do this, or you missed that, and like, I mean, that's good. Because if I didn't have that person and I was doing this all by myself, then I would have made a big mistake.
And that would be a big problem. Yeah, that's sure. That's of course. What would you say are the regular biggest hurdles that you have to overcome to get an event together in all aspects of it, from booking the act to the venue to actually having the show open? What are the biggest hurdles you regularly go through?
Making sure that you've dotted all your I's and crossed your T's, and making sure that
it's not overcoming certain individuals and their personalities. That's not a hurdle for you.
Not really. I mean, I think most of my team works well together.
But you're also dealing with people on the other side of the phone or the other side of the computer.
Yeah, because that could be. I mean, you always got to make sure that the act is happy when they're left, and we always strive to do that. Probably your biggest hurdle is just kind of keeping going, and like I said, making sure the act is happy and they want to come back. And because like I said, there's so many other places to play for other people, that if you want to make sure you're doing the right thing all the time to continue to bring back the act, if you want to pursue them again.
A lot of what you do has to do with dealing with pressure to a certain extent.
Oh yeah.
There's time pressure, there's scheduling pressure, there's all those various pressures. What do you do personally to deal with pressure? How do you handle pressure? Do you like it? Do you thrive on it? Do you hate it? What do you do to deal with it?
Dealing with pressure. I mean, my whole life is pressure. I mean, it's just, it's constantly give you pressure to make sure you get the shows you want and make money, and make sure you have enough money to pay everybody and your staff and everything. So, I mean, there's a lot of pressure, but what do I do to handle that pressure?
Obviously you don't crack up and go into a corner every day and cry. So that's not your thing. You're going to keep moving forward. So how do you handle it? What is your methodology? Is it just, you're just willful and you just keep moving forward, or how do you do it?
It's a little bit of both. I'm willful and moving forward, and trying to remain calm. I mean, sometimes I get riled up. I'm like, oh my God, I got all this stuff to do. And it's like, boom, 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 boom. And sometimes things, when I'm trying to get things done and something, there's something that comes up that I can't get things done. And then I go back to my email and there's 100 emails. And then, that's a whole different story. But you have
that's the story for everybody today. If you're doing anything at all, it's how do you deal with all these freaking emails?
Oh, exactly. But you got to be calm under pressure. I've learned that over years. It's like
Is it about
But
breathing? Do you breathe through it? Do you have a mental technique? Do you try to imagine calmness? What do you do?
no, not really. I mean, I'll, in the mornings I get an hour exercise every morning. I
Mhm.
walk, and that sometimes, helps calm me. I'll work for a little bit, then I'll go off my walk, and then I'll come back and, start my day back again. That helps out, getting that, out there. And I try to keep that as my time. And then I always try to pick Sundays as a day that I try not to do anything, business related. Now, if I have a show, that's different. But, I try to keep Sundays as the mental health day, I like to call it, where I'm not kind of doing anything, to keep my stress level down, if you want to call it.
You decompress.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Aside from a computer, which is obvious, and your phone, which is also obvious, what do you have in your office or on your desk that you couldn't do without? What do you need around you? Is it food? Is it a drink? Is it a picture of something? What do you have that you need to have around you that you need?
I don't know. I never thought about that.
Well, if you've never thought about it, it's not, you don't need anything. You just keep moving
No, I
forward.
guess not. It's like I said, I mean,
But if they took your phone and your computer away from you, you'd be in trouble, right?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
You'd be
Yes.
lost.
Yeah, I couldn't do anything. I've always thought about that. Like, because if I'm like, it used to be when I was traveling on an airplane, let's say I was going somewhere and before they had internet on the airplanes, you're like, it's actually kind of good because you weren't doing any work.
You got away from work. Yeah.
Yeah. But then when you, like I said, when you got off that airplane, you had, the 100 emails that you were trying to deal with at that point, or 150 emails, depending on how long you're, now when you're traveling, you pay your money to be, I'm working on that airplane the whole time, just because maybe sometimes some nights I want to take for myself and not have to work. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, because the airport and the airplane were places where you could get away from things.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Now they've worked it out so you can do things on the plane as well. So it's a little on the insidious side. Well, I have been speaking with a Pittsburgh-based promoter and producer of concert acts and events, Brian Drusky, for close to an hour now. We're going to slowly wind this thing down. I'm just wondering, in all of your many years of experience in doing what you do you have a story you can share that's either weird, strange, offbeat, quirky, or just plain funny?
Here's a funny story. This is a really funny story. I don't know are you familiar with the comedian Ron White?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I had him in
coupons. He says coupons. He has that in his act.
There you go. This was probably about, it had to be about 2008, probably 2009. I can't remember the exact year, but 12, 15 years ago, somewhere around there. And he had the show in Erie, and we after the show, there was a group of us, we all went out to dinner. And in Erie, it was kind of outdoors, but it was kind of indoors. It was kind of weird. It was a nice day out, and some guy comes up to the table and he goes, "I really wanted to go to your show, but I thought tickets were a little expensive. I couldn't afford it." And he goes, "Well, which one of you are Ron White anyhow?" And he points to me. And I'm like, this guy, it's like, yeah, him. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry, dude. I just pretended I was him for a minute." It was kind of funny, but the fact that he pointed to me, it was actually kind of funny.
Oh, Ron White must have felt great about that.
Yeah, it was so funny. It was like the guy said he wanted to come to the show. He obviously didn't know who Ron White was, because he didn't know, he thought I was him at that point. So it was kind of funny.
Obviously, if he thought you were Ron White, he didn't know who Ron White was.
Exactly.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. All right, last question for you today, Brian. You've already given us lots of wonderful advice and thoughts about how to do what you do. But do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip for someone who maybe wants to start out in the business that you're in, or maybe they're in a little bit and would like to get to the next level? Do you have a thought on that?
Make your connections.
Connections.
Connections. I mean, this is a business of who you know, and making good relationships and keeping good relationships and meet people. And if you're just starting out, interning for somebody, or getting in that, or even like getting your foot in the door of somewhere place where you want to work, because then you can work your way up. Take for instance, Adam Vallon was an intern. He started off as our intern, and now he's got he does a lot for the company right now. So so it worked out good.
Well, that's very wise. I mean, and it's true for pretty much any business, but in particular in the entertainment industry, it's all about connections and relationships and maintaining those.
Yeah.
Do you have any tricks for maintaining them? Is it a regular call to people? Is it a regular email to people? How do you keep those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, like you're saying, being honest and making sure that there's no problems when you have your shows, like with different people, and just like saying, making sure you put your, you have a good solid plan of attack for each show, and everyone's happy when they leave, and paying your bills on time, and paying, making sure that everything's done correctly. And like you said, keeping in touch with people, and I talk to all these agents all the time on different things. And if you start getting a good working relationship, it's not just doing all the acts that are going to make money. You take chances on smaller acts. It's like, okay, well, I gave you so and so, which sold 4,000 tickets. I need you to do this act, which might only do 50 tickets. But that's how a relationship works. You take the good with the bad. I'm not saying but that act that only sells 50 tickets today may sell 5,000 tickets a year from now.
Well,
So,
Brian Drusky, this has been an absolutely wonderful hour on StoryBeat. You're the first person I've interviewed on this show in 5 years who really is a promoter of the type of work that you do. And so this has been most instructive and very valuable for anyone that's interested in going into the business that you're in. And I can't thank you enough for coming on StoryBeat today and sharing all of your experience and wisdom with us.
oh, thanks for having me. I love doing this stuff. So it's fun for me.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.